Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, at least 3 journalists are shot with tear gas at close range in Thursday's anti-government protests in Nairobi, Kenya, as media rights watchdogs release a report documenting weeks of alleged police violence and intimidation. Also, aid fails to get through, but weapons are in ample supply. We hear from a Sudanese campaigner, Kholood Khair. She heads up to New York to brief the UN Security Council on the crisis consuming her homeland. And we cast our gaze towards the next phase of Paris sporting excitement, the Paralympics, in which one Kenyan powerlifter is set on going for gold. But first, several journalists were injured by tear gas in Nairobi on Thursday as police cracked down on protests there. Crowds were smaller than in past weeks, and they were met with tear gas canisters as they tried to march through the city centre. The Gen Z-led demonstrations are in their second month. In the latest move to quell growing dissatisfaction with his government, President William Ruto nominated key opposition figures to his cabinet, who were sworn in on Thursday. But popular frustration remains, as our Kenyan correspondent tells us.
Today was supposed to be the day when Kenyans took back their country. It had been dubbed Nane Nane on social media, which means 8-8 in Swahili, referring to the 8th of August, which is a historic day of protests in Kenya. However, despite a lot of mobilization on social media ahead of the event, security officials once again made it almost impossible to protest.
At every corner we are barraged by tear gas, we are barraged by the threat of live bullets, we are barraged by batons and unlawful arrests, and we are having trouble trying to pursue our goals here. We are not trying to cause any harm. We are not trying to disrupt any businesses. We are not trying to harm any people here. We are simply trying to convey our issues to the people who are supposed to be listening to us.
The police are throwing tear gas just for holding a flag. And I have actually had a friend here on Twitter post that they've been arrested simply for singing the national anthem.
They're all over here. They have shot some of us, my friends. They have shot journalists. They have really put measures so that we don't even come to Central Business District, which is very, very wrong.
The demonstrations were sparked in June by a finance bill that would have increased people's taxes. Under pressure, President William Ruto was forced to withdraw that bill. He also fired almost everyone in his cabinet and nominated key opposition members. But for a lot of Kenyans, that's still not enough. They are frustrated by systemic corruption and unemployment. They are also angry about the excessive force used by the police. Since the beginning of the protests, at least 60 people have been killed and dozens more are still missing.
Now, the conflict in Sudan has some horrifying statistics. It's cost tens of thousands of lives and brought famine to 500,000 people at least. 8 million have been forced from their homes in the world's largest displacement crisis, all in the 16 months of fighting between the army and the RSF paramilitary. Aid fails to get through to where it's desperately needed, but weapons continue to be in ample supply. France 24 caught up with Sudanese campaigner Kholood Khair as she was in New York this week to brief the United Nations Security Council on the crisis in her homeland. She says it's a war of far too high costs and far too low engagement from the international community.
This really is, I think, an apocalyptic level of humanitarian desperation that we're seeing in Sudan right now. And the worst part is that there doesn't seem to be any kind of resolution or proper addressing of this on the horizon. The UN Security Council hasn't actually met that many times on Sudan. So this was an opportunity to very quickly bring them up to speed on the situation for women and girls in the country related to the protection concerns that there are and the protection vacuum that has been left behind by the withdrawal of various UN missions. And What we know from reports on the ground is that everything we're hearing leads us to describe Sudan these days in superlatives. It's the world's largest humanitarian situation. It is the world's largest displaced population. It is the world's largest magnitude famine. And those kinds of concerns require very urgent input of resources, very urgent attention by the international community, neither of which are currently there. There are some things that the international community can do very quickly. One is to ensure that Sudan remains at the top of the agenda, or very close to the top of the agenda, in terms of the United Nations, but also other international institutions and global stakeholders' agendas. The second thing is to very quickly get together the data reliably and accurately to report what we're hearing from the ground, which is that famine is not just being reported in one area, but in several areas in the country. Once that famine declaration comes through, the ability to marshal resources, both financial and sort of human resources, to make sure that there is an adequate response should be much easier. Then, of course, there are particular concerns around protection. The United Nations already released its own directions to put together a protection of civilians options paper, and that was in May. Since then, we haven't seen enough traction on that, and we need a concrete, written out, full report giving a full range of options up to and including the deployment of a protection of civilians mission in the country to adequately respond to the concerns of protection for the whole population, but specifically for women and girls. Then there also needs to be, very urgently, a full comprehensive perspective on how to end the conflict in Sudan. Currently, we're seeing a myriad of negotiations in terms of peace negotiations and political negotiations that are not cohering with each other, that are all doing very, very different things. And that is not going to help us get to a ceasefire. And lastly, the recognition, and quite urgently, the recognition that a ceasefire alone will not save lives, that there has to be a much more concerted push from the international community towards inculcating, women's peace and security norms as well as protection norms into the broad work that is going to carry out. And this would be much better housed in a fully fledged protection mission. We need to see much better cross-pollination between the African Union and the United Nations, particularly on this issue of protection, until such time that a ceasefire can be negotiated.
Sudanese activist Kholood Khair there speaking to France 24 as she was in New York to brief the United Nations Security Council over the needs caused by 16 months of war in Sudan. Now, in DR Congo, a military court sentenced all 26 defendants in a war crimes and treason trial to death. 21 of the group are still on the run. They were all accused of belonging to the M23 rebel group. The Congolese government faced backlash from human rights organisations back in March when it lifted a moratorium on capital punishment that had been in place since 2003. The 5 defendants who were present for the trial this week have 5 days to appeal the sentence. And former Ghanaian President John Mahamma's been cleared of any corruption allegations by the special prosecutor. His brother had been accused of accepting bribes on behalf of the head of state from aerospace giant Airbus, allegations that arose amidst confessions from Airbus officials appearing in US and UK courts. Justice Baidu talks us through.
Ghana's special prosecutor launched an inquiry into these investigations in 2020 after it came out of UK, US and French investigations into the issue of European aircraft maker Airbus paying bribes of up to 5 million euros to a network of persons that were accused of brokering these deals on behalf of the Ghanaian government. It was part of the scandal that broke in 23 African countries, including Ghana.
While the accepted facts in the 2 foreign jurisdictions are that the employees of Airbus designed the payments to the intermediaries as bribes intended to court favor with Ghanaian public officials, especially ex-President John Dramani Mahama. On the other hand, the intermediaries appeared to expect and receive the payments as their legitimate expectation under an arrangement of success-based commissions for the sale of the military transport aircraft to the government of Ghana.
Mr. Mahama will be coming up against the current Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, in a very close elections that several polls have suggested Mr. Mahama has a high chance of winning.
Well, look now at the Olympics. Botswana's Letsile Tebogo sped to victory on Thursday night in the 200 metres. The 21-year-old won in 19.46 seconds, the fourth fastest time in history, making him the first African to ever win the short distance at the tournament. And just because the Olympics are due to come to an end this weekend doesn't mean that this summer of sport is ending anytime soon. On the 28th of August, the Paralympics begin, with Kenya sending a team of 14 athletes to compete. And amongst them is veteran powerlifter Helen Wawira Kariuka. Clem Valla has more.
With just a few weeks to go until the Paris Paralympic Games, this Kenyan powerlifter is ramping up her training. Helen Wawira Kariuki was born with spina bifida, a congenital malformation of the spine. However, she has never let her condition stop her from achieving her goals.
I started the sport in 2015 after a powerlifter introduced me to it. And my journey so far has been good. The sport has helped me to have courage, which I did not have before.
The 32-year-old was Kenya's flag bearer at the Tokyo 2021 Games, which saw her end up fifth. In 2022, she managed to secure Kenya's first medal outside of athletics at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, the UK. Scoring 98.5 points in the women's lightweight final, she took home the bronze. That same year, she bagged a gold medal at the World Para-Powerlifting American Open Championships for the women's up to 41 kilo class. Today, as she eyes Paris 2024, she has one goal in mind: ending up on the podium.
I'm competing on the 4th of September. And I'm hoping to win a medal, so I can say I'm hoping for the best. Because anything can happen. And you never know, so I'm hoping for the best.
I'm hoping for the best. For this year's edition of the Paralympics, Kenya will be sending 14 para-athletes who will compete across 5 disciplines, 6 more than in Tokyo.
Oh, wishing you the best as well, Helen. That is all we have time for Eye in Africa. Thanks for joining us, though. Do so again. Take care.